Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies at the University of the Western Cape, and our first inaugural webinar, where we bring you perspectives and voices and analysis pertaining to the challenges facing landless, poor and unemployed people trying to make a living on the margins of capitalism in Southern Africa in the time of the coronavirus. Today, it is our very great privilege to have with us two rural activists. Firstly, we have Connie Mogale of the Alliance for Rural Democracy. And secondly, we have Laurel Oettle of the Association for Rural Advancement in KwaZulu-Natal, and also from the Land Network National Engagement Strategy. Laurel and Connie, it's a great privilege to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
It's very nice to have you here. We'd like to invite the two of you to just briefly sketch out for our listeners the most important ways in which this COVID-19 crisis has affected the lives of rural people in South Africa. Listeners and viewers, you're welcome to add your questions and your comments in the comment box on your YouTube screen. We will put them up on the screen after the presentations have finished and invite our speakers to comment on them. We will take about an hour, and this is going to be a really interesting and exciting discussion. I'm really looking forward to this. So over to you, Connie.
Thank you, Andres, and let me congratulate PLUS for hosting this webinar. It is a learning curve for all of us to cope during this COVID-19. Our concerns as the Alliance for Rural Democracy, firstly, we want to note that we agree that probably the lockdown and the regulations imposed was necessary to combat this pandemic that is a faceless enemy that we are fighting. No one can judge. This is our first experience as a country and as the world, for most of us who are young, who never saw the previous disasters that happened in the world. So for us, we don't judge as to why the president has come up with this sudden announcement, but the lack of planning and a proper safety net for rural South Africans, especially people that live in the Bantustan, and further limiting the movement of people from the province, closing the borders, it's a concern for us, and it has exposed and confirmed our fears that as rural people, government has never prioritized us, has never made us priority to make sure that the social networks, the coordinated response, the deployment of resources reach those who need them most, which are people in the rural areas. So the limiting of movements, the social distancing is going to affect the livelihoods of the people who are, social distancing for rural people is not an issue. We know how our spatial planning looks like. So we live in very big yards in isolated spaces, but we need to move because of one, we need to graze cattle. This is our livelihood. We need to go to the farming fields. We need to go and fetch resources from the field, but also we need water. So the messages that we get for this COVID-19 is wash your hands, isolate yourself, drink water, all those the scarce resources that has been absent in the rural spaces. So how are we going to, how is this going to affect? So the most important thing for us is that probably there could have been a mapping of how this disease is moving, because it started somewhere, it will go somewhere, and to gradually come to a total shutdown. There are areas that are declared essential services, others are not declared essential services. But farming, for example, is an essential services. Movement in the rural areas where this pandemic is not so vigorous because of the social distancing that is happening there. Even though I'm saying that to be corrected, because nobody knows how this thing is gonna move in and whatever, and we can't say it will not affect this group of people. It can affect this group of people, but we are saying that some of the movement could have been allowed. So we see the victimization of harmless people, disarmed people, the deployment of military especially. It is a fact, it's a proof that our government is not ready. Their social networks are not working, or they don't trust them. So was it necessary that government have other infrastructures that they could have made to make sure that people are compliant and the messages reach people? So the long term and the impact of the short and the impact is that people are hungry. That's the short term. We need an immediate response. Secondly, we cannot promote people to supermarkets to distribute food. There's no Pick and Pay in my area in Ventersdorp. There is no ShopRite in my area in Ventersdorp. But there are small-scale farmers. There are farmers, big and small, around, which are having produce. Because of the limited movement, it means their produce is going to go to waste, because they have no markets. So it was an oversight. It shows lack of a coordinated planning and people-centered response, because they could have made sure that those suppliers who are supplying those supermarkets are also prioritized as essential service. So the other thing is that our message as the Alliance for Rural Democracy is that the localization of food distribution is very much important and key and central to this. Secondly, the social distancing, it's gonna make life hard for subsistence farming and for the social network, that all those vulnerable people we find in rural areas, the old people, the orphans, it's going to make it hard to find support from the community around them because of the social distancing. But also we're calling for different messages, because we know that our hospitals are not going to be able to cater for the people who are going to come there. So can't we tell people, message is up to people, individuals, to say to them, don't hide. And because not every symptom needs a hospital, what people can do. So we don't have those messages except washing hands, except social distancing. What else? For example, can the health sector tell us if they find that the person is testing positive or is infected, what is the measures that they are doing? What is the remedies that we can do at home whilst we are self-isolating? So it is the lack of transparency and accountability that we see as to how are our resources deployed. For example, we have a cry out of people who are saying, guys, where are the food parcels? We see you on social media distributing this. The president has announced a solidarity fund. How can we apply? Can we get information coming through in terms of when you are in quarantine? This is what you can do. This is what is safe to do. What are like local remedies, homemade remedies that we could do? Let's get that information coming through. But also, let's have a mapping of a movement of this virus, so that then government can know, or even people can know where to deploy resources. So it must not be an autocratic decision where people think NGOs are best placed to deploy things. NPO trustees are the ones who are best deployed to receive. But we have seen the rejection of NPOs which are registered under the social development. And we know that those caregivers, those care workers in the rural areas are mostly registered under social development as NPO. Now, if you reject those certificates, if you reject those people, what are you saying? We have seen, we heard the president extending the lockdown and announcing that there's 1 billion rands already spent on the Solidarity Fund. Can we have transparency and accountability as to who receives the resources? How are the resources deployed? how can people access those resources? We don't have that database, and we see the categorization and compartmentalization of people. And another thing, the Bantustan mentality that is so invisible but so visible, coming through in terms of how the resources are deployed, who gets what, who can get, who can move where. So that's another thing. The other thing that we want is a coordinated communication strategy from government, but also we need district specific plans. So what is the role of all those, that infrastructure that municipalities can use? Where's the role of the municipalities? Where's the role of the IEC? Where's the role of those locally based offices which are accessible to people? We saw that they have labeled traditional authorities as essential services. We welcome that, but we are saying not all the places are responsive to traditional authorities. There are places where farm workers without traditional authorities, the communal property associations, which are landholding structures for government, governing local customary institutions that are people are using, women in particular. So if you make the economy of the country suffer, you must know that people who are going to bear the brunt are rural people in their Bantustans, and they are women. Now, without a coordinated response, we are panicking. We see our government swimming in the water. We see our president's face, the way he is so humble, the way he's not sure. He's like a person who's not sure of the future. We want to know, government must announce plans of this post-lockdown. What is going to happen? What are we to expect? They need to prepare us for the worst or for the better. So as the Alliance for Rural Democracy, we are sympathetic to those rural people we are working with. We want to help, but we don't know where are the entry points. But we also don't want our eyes to be taken off the ball. Our project is a political one. We need to push for policy change. This must be a learning curve for us all, the departments, the civil society, parastatals. It must be a learning curve of the mistakes that we have done. Where did we go wrong? Why are we not able to effectively respond to disaster? So we need a disaster management plan that is coordinated, that is convincing, to make sure that we are able to survive this disaster. This is not the first one. We are told, the media are telling us, the World Health Organization, we are told we must expect for the West. But if the West is not coming, we must be sure that we are ready. We are able to survive, swim ourselves out of these things, and we're not pointing fingers, but we are saying, as South Africans, as government, as civil society, how do we join hands without putting class, race, and gender in it, but all of us recognizing and valuing our contribution, and joining hands to say, let's come up with a disaster management plan. Let's come up with a communication strategy that is going to make sure that we survive, we get the messages to the people at the right time. We also have we need to make sure that poverty, which is arising, which has been there, doesn't only be a face of a Black person, a rural person, a woman. So this is what we are saying. And I thank you. I will just pause there for a while. Thank you, Andres.
Thank you, Connie, for that very detailed picture of the extent of the confusion and the crisis in rural areas. We'll come back to you in a little while. I've got many questions, and I'm sure our viewers have too. But before that, Laurel, could you tell us what you're seeing from your perspective in KwaZulu-Natal?
Great, thanks so much, Andres, and thank you, Connie, for kicking us off with such a valuable contribution. Luckily, the Alliance for Rural Democracy is one of our very active members in LandNNES, so you will hear some overlap between my contribution, which has echoes of some of the food issues, particularly that Connie has raised. So as we sit here in this simultaneously global, national, and localized crisis of COVID-19 and the measures to contain it, There are unfortunately devastating employment and economies in ways that are being described as similar to the 1929 stock market crash and the subsequent global economic implosion. Within days of the lockdown, NGOs working with rural and urban people on land, agriculture, and food issues were already receiving reports from communities of a gathering food security crisis that is only growing. The lockdown has caused job losses, eroded wage incomes, halted transport routes to purchase foods and receive social grants, closed down small retailers and food suppliers, as well as many feeding schemes, and has eviscerated the informal markets of small farmers. The absence of savings among the poor and the already food-compromised households and communities meant that as a network, we needed to act with extreme speed. So LandNNES, as Andries introduced us, the Land Network National Engagement Strategy of South Africa, is a network of NGOs, community-based organizations, academics, social movements, alliances, and networks who work on land governance and on food production. We reached out to a range of other civil society organizations, research institutions, farmers, community-based structures, farm dwellers and workers, and networks across the country, and began to pull together an assessment and a set of proposals for how civil society organizations can contribute to ensuring food and nutrition security during this time. So while we and the majority of the people we spoke to also support government strategies to contain the spread of the virus, we are motivated by a very keen awareness that the lockdown measures and their economic consequences have disrupted food and resource flows between rural and urban areas, but also within households. To understand the impact of the lockdown in South Africa and what assistance is most needed in vulnerable communities, you really just have to put your ear to the ground and listen. In Mpendle, a 19-year-old shared with us that she's passionate about agriculture, but she's really worried about the current situation. As a small-scale farmer, she sells her produce in the community, but she's been affected by the lockdown as she can't sell her produce anymore, and she hasn't registered her business, which means she doesn't qualify for a permit to sell. She is grateful for the reaction of the government towards those who are not obeying the rules of the lockdown, because she feels that if people continue in this matter, the lockdown will only be extended and this will cause further constraints in their families. Emma Kumalo, who is an 84-year-old, shared with us her fears about after her local clinic and her ward counsellor announced that there was someone with COVID-19 in their area. And she said, "We can't go out because we're afraid of this disease as we are old." They're not aware of anyone distributing food in their area, but they aren't able to generate food and income for themselves during the shutdown. And the desperation is growing as their remaining food supplies are dwindling through the month. COVID-19 has illuminated in a very stark way the vulnerabilities of South Africa's food systems. The historical and post-apartheid centralization and consolidation of production, agricultural supplies, and food retailers means that South Africa's agricultural and food economy is dominated by a small number of corporate conglomerates who squeeze out producers and small suppliers, even in normal times. COVID-19 has thus come into a highly skewed and constrained environment, with disaster measures to contain its spread locking people down in old apartheid spaces without adequate supplies of food and healthcare. The results are already catastrophic, with hunger and food shortages being reported at large scale that we haven't seen before for at least half a century in this country. Small-scale farmers continue to play an important role in providing food in their local communities, and that is where we're really focusing a lot of our energy around looking at not just the immediate response to the crisis, but how the next few months and indeed the coming years of economic crisis are going to impact. So while small-scale farmers on their own can't provide all the demand in their areas, and many have lost access to their markets, they still play an absolutely critical role that we really feel needs to be scaled up urgently. Some small-scale farmers are finding that they can't access the agricultural inputs that they need, so they can't keep producing. They have been really in a quite difficult situation around permits. It's been very difficult to access permits, and there's a shifting environment around that. And as Connie shared, a lot of repression and violence, which means police, we've heard cases where police have actually torn up valid permits of small-scale farmers. So we feel that how we support our smallholder farming communities in the coming months to a year will really determine to a large extent whether people will survive as farmers and also as suppliers of local food systems. Otherwise, we run the risk of having them become a further burden on the already widely stretched state resources of grants and food parcels. So another grandmother, Florence Lutuli, she shared with us from where she lives in Mulwani in KwaZulu-Natal that they're going to lose their food. She says, we've already planted our seed, but we can't get out to weed the crops or to water the garden, so they're dying. Amos Thusi is 61, shared that their municipality was supposed to be providing them with potato seed, but now the municipality is not providing services. They depend on this garden for their food, and they don't know how they're going to manage the coming few weeks, let alone months. So as LandNNES, to work towards food and nutrition security for the majority of South Africans, after listening to people's realities under the lockdown, we believe that 3 key areas of the food system, namely production, distribution, and household access to sufficient and nutritional food, should be addressed, as well as the cross-cutting issue of why a single open access spatial infrastructure should be developed and how it could assist. While our focus is on immediate interventions, our hope is to use this moment to engage around how we can fundamentally shift food systems in the longer term to better serve the majority of South Africans. In the short term, we've proposed a wide range of immediate interventions that have come both from communities themselves and from the organizations that support them. Civil society can contribute to these interventions in terms of either lobbying for change with government and the private sector, monitoring implementation, and in some cases actually implementing themselves if sufficient resources are available. We have published a document called Food and Nutrition Security in the Context of COVID-19 in South Africa, Civil Society Action Planning. It is available publicly on the LandNNES website, which contains a much more detailed breakdown of proposals. But maybe just to share just some of the ideas that have emerged as critical at this time. I think Connie already touched on the critical importance of communication. And information is really crucial for people to make rapid and informed decisions at this pivotal time. So having the means to receive and send information will keep fishers, small-scale farmers, and communities informed and protected. Many of them will not be reached by government information, and the information they receive is aimed at the health crisis and not giving them the information they need around production and how to access food. So we feel that there's very targeted information that needs to be generated and sent to communities around what foods can be produced at this time that will boost immunity, provide nutritious, fresh food, how they can access seedlings, inputs to be able to plant at this time during lockdown, but also where they can obtain permits and essential services. But that needs to be streamlined and fast-tracked because there's just a massive slowdown in who can access these permits and how the permits are changing with time. People also need to know what food is available and where, particularly local producers who have excesses because they are not able to sell at their usual points like SASSA grant collection points. There are less people in towns, therefore there is excess produce going to waste. So we need to create local systems where that food can be equitably distributed to those in need. So it's also really important that farmers are made aware of and held to account for their responsibilities to provide workers with safe working environments, but also to enable them to access affordable and nutritious food. So we've definitely seen a positive shift in this regard, and government has been very much supporting this and starting to monitor it. But there are still reports coming through from some farm workers who are not being provided with adequate equipment. But of even more concern, there are farm workers reporting that farm owners are not letting them leave the farm because they're concerned that they will bring back the virus onto the farm. That means that they can't access affordable food. In some cases, they are being forced to buy from the local farm shop, but prices have been inflated. So they're able to purchase less food, and certainly less nutritious food. Another major concern is the shutdown of small-scale food producers, just at the time where they could be making the most valuable contribution. 3 farmers in Mpofana shared their frustrations with us. They've all reached retirement age already, and they have 4 hectares of land where they've been producing cabbage and spinach. They don't have a formal market. They load their produce onto a van and go and sell it to street vendors in town. Usually they make their most sales at the end of the month when people are collecting their social grants. Government has announced that they can sell to locals, but to them it makes no difference because there are less people to sell to. It would be a waste to harvest it because they can't sell it. When they were asked what they wish government could have done to save their business, they said government could contact them and buy their produce, and it can be redistributed to the poor during this time rather than rotting in the fields. Also importantly, over the last few days, a group of over 60 organizations have pulled together proposals for how the government's Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform can rethink the announced $1.2 billion COVID-19 disaster relief fund for small-scale farmers. The submissions makes alternative proposals for the administration of relief to these farmers, particularly focusing on 4 immediate issues. So looking at broadening the criteria for which small-scale farmers are entitled to apply for the relief, which at the moment is capped at a minimum annual turnover of 20,000 Rand. Ring fencing some of the budget for allocation to resource-poor farmers, broadening the kinds of agricultural supplies and type of support that farmers can access, and importantly, extending the deadline for submissions of applications, which is due to end on the 20th of April, which is only a few days away, with many farmers not even knowing about this relief available at this point. We did hear today that there might be a second round of applications from government looking at addressing these issues, but we are making the submission at the end of the day today. So if anyone is interested in endorsing and supporting us, please do contact me after the seminar, and we'd love to engage. I do think that, as Connie said, it's crucial for us to come together at this time and really raise the voices of rural, vulnerable communities. So, you know, I think in that respect, we really need to look at how we come together in new ways. You know, I think this webinar is an excellent example of how some of us are trying to adapt our ways of working, still able to connect broadly and outside of our normal networks. We tend to work around our key areas of expertise with like-minded organizations and in relatively siloed approaches. So really want to commend the C19 People's Coalition, which now has more than 250 organizations across the country endorsing its program of action. As LandNNES, we've joined their food working group because we feel this is a time to pool our efforts and to present as united and a front as possible to make very concrete and practical proposals, and to work in multi-stakeholder ways with our government, with the private sector, to find the solutions that our people need. We also feel that these coalitions need to be built from the grassroots upwards and reflect the actual lived realities of people on the ground who are experiencing the greatest hardship during this pandemic. We really need to amplify the solutions that they themselves are proposing. So we look forward to taking this conversation forward. I'm really looking forward to your comments and engagement and questions. I think for me, my greatest hope at this point is that the vulnerabilities in our country, which are being thrown into such stark relief by COVID-19, will help us to create conditions of fundamental change. Now, many of these changes, a lot of us activists have been advocating for decades with very limited success. But this moment, while it's filled with fear and confusion and hunger and desperation, within this moment, we also see the seeds for change. So my hope is that we can water these seeds very carefully together and in the coming months and years ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel and Connie, for those pictures. You've raised many important and alarming questions, but I want to start. Pretty soon we're going to go to some of our viewers' questions, which have been popping up in the comment box. But I want to start with one or two questions from my side, if I may. And I'm going to begin with just with a basic health question. I was really alarmed, Connie, by your comments about the thinking about the impacts, the impact of this health crisis on rural health systems. Now, in the time of the HIV pandemic, there was a lot of emphasis on the development of rural clinics and the development of networks of community health workers who would be, in a way, the first line of response to take care of the health of people in the rural areas. What is your sense of the readiness of rural health systems, of rural clinics and rural hospitals? We've been told, rather alarmingly, by Dr. Zweli Mkhize that this is the calm before the storm, that the time of the massive increase in cases is still coming. Are the health systems in our rural areas ready? I'd like to hear, Connie, particularly your views on that. Thank you.
So, Andres, the health systems which are there is buildings. And let me tell you, most of the rural areas, they don't even have clinics. They depend on mobile clinic. So a clinic that comes once in a week, once in a month, like that. So when we were doing the assessment of what is happening in our areas where we work, we called Eastern Cape, we spoke to Sister Novuso, Nopote, Nomonde Pindani. We went at the Bojanala where the mining sector is vibrant and working, and talk to healthcare workers that Lamosa is working with. And what they are telling us is that the health workers are overwhelmed. There is no any equipment sent to them. At this time, we heard the MEC saying they have ordered health equipments. They are still coming on their way, but we know that they will. The entry point is all those big cities: Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town. How are they gonna send it to the rural people, the rural health centers? So the health centers are overwhelmed. They don't have facilities. But most importantly, that is why we're calling for transparency and accountability, is that I think the messaging is not enough. We need to be told as to if a person is infected or have symptoms and suspects, what is it that they can do as a home remedy? It's not coming through. So the health sector is overwhelmed, and they are telling the rural health centers, they are not the caregivers network. They are not equipped with important equipment that they need. They are not equipped with information. So it is bad in rural areas. And we always, when we write op-ed every time, we make sure that we contact those people. We get to know what is happening. So it is so overwhelming, especially because this is not our area of expertise. This is not a core business of the Alliance for Rural Democracy, but it is something that we cannot turn a blind eye on. We need to deal with it. So we keep on every time making assessment and checking up on them. But we also had the communication strategy that we have launched, and we are planning to make sure that we get those people who have devices where we can load communication systems like Zoom, Skype, whatever, to make sure that we engage them regularly and keep them engaged and track down what is happening. And I believe that our role as civil society now need to be clear. They are implementing civil society to distribute food, but we cannot now all distribute food. Some of us must monitor where is the food going, where is the help going. The health centers must be equipped. We must also monitor and track down what is happening in the rural area. So we have, I have spoke already about the water scarcity. The rural people are depending on water streams, and those messages about washing hands, which are so relevant, are not applicable to them because they need to go to the water stream to get. So if there's no water in the tap, it means even the health centers in the rural areas don't have water in their taps. So what are we doing? Yes, we have seen a response about distributing water tanks, which is amazing. But I mean, really, South Africa must come. All this infrastructure used by government to count people, to distribute SASA. So we need also to evaluate how effective is our social systems, security systems. Where is the gap? This is an opportunity for us to say, as we call for redistributive government, how redistributive is our government? How can we keep the gap? So it is the impacts on the health systems of rural Bantustans is gonna be felt as the lockdown is extended and there's no uncertainties. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. That is a alarming, concerning picture. I know you and most of our listeners are much more concerned with the food security and related questions. So I'm going to go to that. One of the big issues that we have in South Africa is that we already have an enormously concentrated food system with far more supermarket penetration than anywhere else in Africa. Something like upwards of 2/3, even some say close to 3/4 of the food sold in South Africa is coming through the big four supermarkets. And it seems that this crisis is only intensifying this level of concentration, and that for the supermarkets, this is actually an opportunity to increase their market share. So I understand your concern with the position of informal traders and informal producers. Now, many of the proposals from government sound on the face of it quite reasonable. There's a notion that informal traders that have licenses from municipality can trade. There's an emphasis on registered farmers. How appropriate is this emphasis on formalization in the food sector? Do our municipalities, particularly in the rural areas, even have the capacity to issue the license? Are the small farmers who want to produce and who can't take their food to the market, are they even on the databases of our department? Can you please comment on that? Both you and Connie, I'd like to hear, both you and Laurie, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So Laurel, you want to go first or should I? So most of our small scale producers are not registered in the database of the department. They don't even know how to do it. So with the announcement of the Minister of Rural Development as the relief fund, LandNNES and have been trying to encourage us to compile a database of those small scale farmers who are not necessarily registered. So we have been getting loads and loads of people that are calling us to say, please register us. They don't even have this information about the funding and how to get it. So there was a research that Lamosa did on the contribution of small-scale farmers who are not, and even care workers who are not registered in the mainstream databases of departments and government. And their contribution, which is undervalued, because when they count the economic contribution of mining and agriculture and all the other sectors, tourism, they don't count the contribution of ordinary men and women who are not in their mainstream, who are always producing and making sure that they provide a safety net for rural people who are not accommodated in the budget. So it is now high time to consider and recognize the contribution of those people, because right now we will depend solely on them to reach out to those. So there are many of them who are not registered in the databases. Most of them are women-led, and all those small scale. I don't know what is your definition of small scale, but I'm talking about all those women who are doing their backyards, gardens, small gardens, chickens, and subsistence farming on livestock. So those people are not on the database of government, and it is up to the civil society now to vigorously identify, map them out, make sure that they've got a platform. And for us, that is the positive thing about this COVID disaster, because for once in a lifetime, these people can be recognized.
Thank you, Connie. We've got a question from Ben Cousins on the screen here, raising this exact point. The 1.2 billion rand emergency funding for small farmers, for some reason, has this cutoff point of 20,000 rand per annum. Now, for those of us used to medium or large scale agriculture, that sounds quite small. But how exclusionary is this 20,000 rand per annum boundary, and to what extent, how many people in your area do you think are falling below this cutoff point and are actually in need of funding?
So this is very exclusionary, and I don't want to take time. I want Laurel to speak about the letter that we just endorsed, that on that 20,000 quota that is needed. So there's already a letter that is going out circulating for endorsement on raising concern about that 20,000 threshold. So it is very exclusionary, because also our rural people are not economists, so they are not going to prove the 20,000 or not 20,000, because they will need records. They will need to know your profit, income, loss, whatever, which is our people are not almost farming for selling or for profits. So they're not keeping records of how much produce they are doing, how much they sell, and how much. So they don't have those records. So it is I think it's intentionally excluding them, really.
Concerning points. There's, to what extent has one of the questions asked that have come up in the comment box, I don't know whether we can have it up in the screen, is a question about the extent to which government has been including representatives of civil society and included them in discussions about the provision for rural society. Could you answer that question? There's a question from Nancy Kachingwe about how rural society has engaged civil society actors from the land and rural development sector. Connie, could you answer that? Oh, Laurel is back.
Yes, sorry about that. My internet dropped.
Andrews, can you hear me?
So, Laurel, our question is, to what extent government has engaged civil society actors from your sector? Do you feel that you're in dialogue with government, that you're being heard, or do you feel you're on the outside and not getting an audience from the people who are involved in the drafting of the COVID-19 response?
Great. Thanks for the question, and good to be back. Sorry, I missed part of the conversation. Well, I think what's been critical is that the first few weeks of the response were focused on health and on the economy. So there was very little focus or conversation happening within government around the food issue, and particularly the impact on the agricultural sector. They were looking at it very much from a commercial agricultural angle only. So certainly in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a big opening up of discussion from government, particularly within agriculture, rural development and land reform. So we are very welcoming of that opening of dialogue, and we really look forward to taking full advantage of building stronger dialogue with government and with the support of the United Nations as well going forward. So I think it's a moment where dialogue is opening up and government is welcoming very practical suggestions from civil society. So yeah, we have been a bit out of the loop in the last few weeks, but it's shifting quite rapidly. And I think, groups like the C19 People's Coalition have been putting a very strong voice out there. And as I said, the food group certainly is starting to be heard and will certainly be invited into dialogue with government in the near future.
A lot of our discussion here has been on the response from government side, but there's also quite a lot of interest in civil society and from the broader public who are concerned, who don't want to see their fellow country people going hungry. Is it possible to mobilize civil society energies and use existing activities and funding from civil society to support food security in the rural areas? That's a question that comes from Onkameta and Teta in our comment box.
Do you want to give a first stab, Connie, or should I respond? Okay, I think you're on mute. Look, I think there's been a very strong push to mobilize civil society, and I think I shared that for me it's been hugely encouraging to see quite how much people have been stepping outside their usual work and their usual silos and trying to connect and respond as quickly as possible to the virus. To be frank, I think a lot of civil society has been weakened over the past decade, at least, if not 2 decades, around, steadily shrinking funding environment, shrinking skills, inability to keep up with salaries in other sectors. So really seeing a draining of resources to civil society, but also more specifically to social movements and to kind of grassroots-based organizations where more funding is going to the larger NGOs that are better established in terms of meeting donor requirements. So what I'm hoping and what I'm starting to see is that there's an awakening of the critical importance of grassroots networks and organizations. So we are engaging some of our funders at the moment around how we shift resources at this critical time. And I've been hugely heartened by the response of our donors, both in South Africa and around the world, who absolutely understand the need to respond to this this crisis and are shifting funds and enabling us as organizations to shift funds to deal with the crisis. There are, however, massive gaps, particularly in rural areas where civil society doesn't currently reach. In some cases, we used to be able to reach those areas, and because our organizations have been shrinking and weakening, we can no longer reach into the deep rural areas. So that's where one of my main concerns is. And as I've been reaching out, trying to find organizations who can help with delivery of food parcels, but also to reach farmers in deeper rural areas to enable them to access support and inputs. I'm coming up short, I have to admit. The urban areas are very well covered by civil society, but our rural areas are in desperate need of other interventions because civil society alone at the moment doesn't have the capacity to reach as far as we need.
Thank you. Here's a question for both of you. We've been concentrating very much on the situation in South Africa, but Philan Zamchia asks whether you can tell us anything about what civil society organizations are doing more broadly, regionally at the SADC or AU level. And what do you think should happen in the region as a whole? Our responses may be local, but the virus is not going to be local. And in the long run, the whole region is going to be affected by what happens with our neighbors. What are your thoughts? Connie and Laurel, please let us know.
Yeah.
Connie?
So thank you. I think as the Alliance for Rural Democracy, what we did, we commissioned a discussion paper on COVID-19 and the responses. We've circulated broadly and we got a very excellent response from Zimbabwe, in particular Nancy Kachingwe, from Malawi, people giving us feedback of what is happening in their areas and what could be the thing. So there's also been very excellent initiatives from other organizations, even the C19, where civil society has been mobilized across the region and signing in. Things like, for example, the debt that that we owe to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Why don't we call, because everybody wants to be sympathetic to the cause. People want to look like they are offering, funding and contributing to the funds. But there is a big question on how is South Africa going to survive this economic crisis when they are owing a big debt to these institutions, and when they are now there's an offer that the World Bank or IMF wants to give South Africa $1 billion for this, or how many $1 billion. Do we want to do that? So there's been a sign in to say, if really these people are concerned, let us sign in a petition to say they need to make a relief in the debt relief. For example, probably cut it by half or just eradicate it. Because if they still hold these countries, the regional countries, to this debt, the economy is going to be even worse. So, I mean, Africa has been contributing a lot more to the world's economic welfare, and that contribution needs to be counted and be discounted. So I think this is what has been happening. We are not working at a regional level, but our discussion paper that we had done is beginning to touch at how do we monitor trends at regional level. Do we have a capacity to do that? And how effective are we going to be in making sure that we don't keep our eye off the ball of on the ground mobilization, because we are on the ground. We don't fully participate in C19, but we contribute. We don't want to fully participate at regional because it will make a deficit and a gap in terms of the work that we want to do as an alliance on the ground. So this is the contribution that the civil society has been doing. Thank you.
If I can quickly add onto that. I think as South Africa, we have the highest number of infections in Africa, although Egypt is catching up rapidly, as is Morocco and Algeria. So I think, the example of how we're able to respond and prepare in South Africa is quite important to share, to help other countries prepare. And as Connie said, to monitor what's actually happening and unfolding. So from LandNNES' side, we've shared, we also, as I'd said earlier, produced a document quite quickly on civil society responses and analyzing the situation around food and nutrition. And we've shared that widely through our partnership also with the International Land Coalition, who have global partnerships, but also a very strong African network. And we have an online meeting, in fact, tomorrow, with a number of other African countries to share our experiences and to look at how we can respond to the pandemic across Africa. So I think it's crucial that we do share, even though our contexts in different countries are quite different. Certainly there are key elements that we can share and that can help other countries prepare or have more time to prepare than we had here in South Africa.
Thank you, Laurel. And here we have a very practical question coming us from Tatiel in the rural Eastern Cape. Really a question about how people who actually have capacity to distribute food, how do they obtain the permits to allow them to do this? Have you got any pointers for them about how to proceed?
Hello. So I don't know if can you hear me, guys? Hello.
We can hear you, Connie.
Yes. So I have never attempted to get a permit, but I think you need to go to the police station to get then they will give you a procedure to get a permit. So if I want to move to the other side of town, I always go to the police station. And what they told me in my area is that I don't need a permit if I'm inside the province, and for as long as I can prove where I'm going, and for as long as we are not crowded in the car, I'm alone or we are two. So I think the Matatiele and the Umzimvubu catchment partnership can go to their local police station and get the procedures. Also, I think Plus will leave our contact details for them to join the broader civil society coalition to get access to information and to exchange and share with them, so that because with the social distancing and the limitation on movement, we really need those catchment center and those local networks to make sure that we can reach out and distribute help where it is needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can also just add quickly, there has been a shift in food in permits specifically for those delivering food parcels just in the last few days. And there was a new directive issued today, I believe, specifically the allocation of permits. So they're taking it away from police stations and others and trying to have a more coordinated approach. I'm having information come into me about that at the moment. I haven't had a chance to read it while we've been on this webinar, but that certainly I can share that with the group as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Laurel, and thank you, Connie. I have so many more questions from my side, and there are more questions in the chat box. We haven't even touched on the absolutely burning issue about what's going to happen with the child support grants and the urgent need to get money into the hands of poor people who are affected by this crisis. But we've run out of time. We will put all the links and the documents up on our website, www.plas.org.za. So we will share your links as organizations and whatever further information you have to share so that our viewers can follow up. And we will go on with these discussions. There are many issues to explore. So we'd like you all to tune in with us this time next week, Thursday, between 1 and 2. We hope to have a briefing then for you looking at what's happening at the informal sector in the urban areas. That promises to be a very exciting discussion as well. But thank you very much, Connie and Laurel, for giving us this urgent message from the rural areas. Good luck with your work. Keep on pushing, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Andres. Thanks, Connie. Thanks to everyone who listened and shared their questions and thoughts. We really look forward to continuing the engagement.
Thank you, viewers. Stay well, wash your hands, and stay healthy. Until next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.